everyone. Here we are. I think I'm live. Facebook always gives you a little time before you go live. Um, all right, looks like I am in fact live and here with you all for a little Q&A. I only got one question, however, but I think this question is one that I can talk about for quite a while. I will double check and just make sure that that is correct. Um, so I'm outside on our porch. Do you all want to see? This is where I live. It's just gorgeous. This is where I watch the sunrise every morning. Just a little beautiful spring day here. Apple trees are starting to bloom. And David's got a bunch of his starts on the table behind me for our garden, and we just got new porch furniture, which is so exciting. So, little insight into my life. The new backdrop. Yeah, this isn't a picture that I found on Google. This is my porch. I'm a little backlit, but hopefully that'll be fine. Um, yay, Kelly's here. She's here to support you in the chat. And I would love to hear any questions too that you all have that come up from anything that I share, or if you have a spur of the moment question that you didn't write in as a request, but you are interested in learning more, I can uh, spur of the moment, speak to things if I am able to. All right. Oh, awesome. Joy Tanner just got one in. Thanks, Kelly. So Nikki wrote in this wonderful question about, can you talk about the best ways to get enough protein on a plant-based diet? Thank you. So this is a great question, and this is one that I get frequently as somebody who is a proponent of a plant-based diet. Now, we all know that there are a million diets out there. And when we talk about a diet, it's, I think what comes to mind is a prescriptive way of eating. Like everybody who's on this diet can eat this or cannot eat this, or don't eat foods that are prepared this way. And what I want to point out before I go into specifics of answering this question, which is a great question, by the way, Nikki, and I'm sure there's lots of people that have wondered the same thing. Before I go into that, I just want to say that if you're eating in alignment with Ayurveda, there is not that kind of prescriptive way, like everybody who eats an Ayurvedic diet eats this way, because it's very individual. What is true is that there's a focus on seasonal eating. So we're eating foods that are in season, which are the best for our seasonal alignment and for our microbiome. And we're eating locally as much as possible, which again is best for our microbiome when our macrobiome is innately informing. Oh, we have a door. Oh, it's not gonna slam. The wind's blowing and this door is about to slam over here. When we have a macrobiome that is informing our microbiome, meaning we are ingesting the bugs, the bacteria from our actual environment. And you all know we're made up of more viruses and bacteria than we are our actual own innate cells. We are healthiest when we're nourished that way by our macrobiome. Okay, so those are the things we want to look at. Now, in Ayurveda, it's not like everybody eats a certain way, as you all have learned, that we understand that we want to eat seasonally, we want to eat plant-based, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment, and we want to eat in alignment with our constitution. And this is really key as we understand plant-based diet, because plant-based diet is going to look different depending on your constitution. Okay, so there's lots of information out there about what plant-based diet is. Now, some people will say that's vegetarian, some people say it's vegan. What I want to say about plant-based diet, my opinion, of what, or my take on what plant-based diet is from an Ayurvedic perspective, is that you're eating mostly plants. Regardless of your constitution, you're eating mostly plants. Now, that's going to look a little different depending on your constitution. So, for instance, if you are more kapha predominant, meaning the elements of earth and water are your primary makeup in your constitution, you need less heavy foods. So you're not going to need as much animal protein if you eat animal protein, or heavy grains even in your diet. And pitta people are going to need more of a balance between heavy and light. And then, and I'm referring to protein as a heavy food, okay? If you think about it, it's really dense. Proteins, whether they're animal protein or vegetable proteins, they're a more dense food. And then Vada people are going to need even more dense food. Now, the irony is that most Vada people who are made up, the elements are air and ether, tend to be light, thin body frame when they're in balance. All doshas can gain weight. The weight gain doesn't discriminate. Any dosha can gain weight. But the elements of Vata have a person when they're in balance being a lighter frame. I have a Vata body, and we actually need more protein, more animal protein if we are eating animal protein, or we need to be really on top of getting enough vegetable protein if we're doing that. So if we're eating a plant-based diet, Nikki, here's the answer to your question. If you're eating a plant-based diet, you want to eat mostly plants. And the fallacy in our culture is that we tend to think that plants don't have protein in them, and they do. And we need to learn about how to eat enough protein and the amount of vegetables that is ideal for most people to eat is a lot more than most people are eating. If you are to look at um, if you were to look at your plate, you would want 50 to 75% of your plate to be vegetables. Now, the vegetables would depend on the season, and they would depend on your constitution, what you're focusing on there. So vegetables contain protein, as do legumes, beans, and nuts and seeds. So those are good sources if you are not eating animal protein. And now Ayurveda is not a vegetarian system, and animal protein can be very helpful, but it's thought of more if you do need animal protein. And again, Vadas would be more likely to do well with animal protein, Pittas a little bit, and Kaphas not so much. But you want to eat it more like a condiment than a main course. Okay, and ideally in the middle of the day when your digestive fire is strongest. Okay, this is review for some of you, but helpful to know, repeat again and again this information. So what are some foods that are really high in protein? So I actually saw this question in time to pull out some notes. Okay, so when we like I said, we tend to be focused on getting enough protein. Um, and we hear lots of conversations about this, like, do you have enough protein in your diet? And oh my gosh, protein, protein, protein. And if we're eating a good amount of fresh foods, we're generally getting a fair amount of protein. But here's a good guideline is for you to calculate kind of, so this is a general estimation, is that you want 0.36 grams of protein per pound of you. Okay. And I would say that for your ideal body weight. Okay, because you want to support your body at the weight that you feel healthiest at. Okay, so ideal body weight. So 0.36 grams of protein. So I just did this for myself. So I weigh around 120 pounds. So at 120 pounds with 0.36 grams of protein per pound, that comes out to I need around 43 grams of protein a day. Okay, so I'm just saying this about myself so that I give you a real life context for it. Okay, so 43 grams of protein. So here are um, some stats with that in terms of plant-based foods. Now, if you're aiming to have, and to be totally honest, I don't think in terms of calories. So I exist in a culture that focuses on calories, and one of my biggest achievements I feel like is for um, members of the Vitality Circle that I work with have said, I no longer think about food in terms of calories. I think about it in terms of nourishment. And that is like, yes, yes, yes. I love that. We want to think about nourishing ourselves, not in terms of good or bad calories, and then the whole conversation with food changes. However, I do want to point out if you're understanding food in terms of calories, that if you're eating, so a standard American aims to eat about 2,000 calories of food a day. And if we're looking at 2,000 calories of food a day, we want about 200 to 700 of those to be protein. Okay, so it's not even half, not even, yeah, kind of more like a third at most. Okay, so here are some foods that are good for eating in a plant-based diet, eating regularly, that have a fair amount of protein in them. So you can start thinking about this. So some of the highest are beans. And remember, the larger the bean, the more challenging it is to digest. So lentils are actually really high in protein and they're easy to digest. So 1 cup of cooked lentils has 18 grams of protein in it. That's awesome. 1 cup of chickpeas, now this is a larger bean, but 1 cup of cooked chickpeas has 15 grams of protein. 1 ounce of nutritional yeast, those of you in the Vitality Circle will appreciate this from our last retreat. We had a big discussion on nutritional yeast. 1 ounce of nutritional yeast contains 14 grams of protein. Here's some other things. 1 cup of cooked quinoa contains 8 grams of protein. 1 cup of wild rice contains 7 grams of protein. 1 ounce of hemp seeds contains 10 grams of protein. 1 ounce of almonds contains 6 grams. 1 ounce of chia seeds contains 4.7 grams. And let's look at actual vegetables. Green peas, 1 cup of green peas contains 8.6 grams of protein. Green peas, it's a pretty good dose of protein right there. 1 cup of Brussels sprouts, Kathleen Snelling's Brussels sprouts, I know you'll watch this eventually, is 5.6 grams of protein. 1 cup of cooked asparagus is 4 grams of protein. 1 cup cooked spinach is 5.3 grams of protein. So, and 2 teaspoons of spirulina has 8 grams of protein. So those are just some overviews. Now, other foods have protein in them too. Fruits have some protein. There, it's just that we need to understand that um, protein isn't just like meat or beans or protein powder. And I'm actually very wary of protein powders and supplements in that way. I really encourage folks to get their protein and all dietary needs as much as possible met through your food. Now, that's not to say I don't take some supplements, I do, and you may too. Things like fish oil or primrose oil or vitamin D or zinc, things like that. Our food supply is more depleted than it has ever been before. Another reason to eat as locally as possible and to grow your own food as much as possible so you can really tend to the soil. The health of our soil is innately linked to the health of us and our microbiome. So I hope that's really helpful. Nikki, if you're here and you have any additional questions, or if anybody else does about plant-based diets. Now, if you look at things like, I just think about some of like my favorite meals are like to have a grain, to have like rice or quinoa, and then uh, some steamed or roasted vegetables. Um, so a bunch of those, and then some. A sauce on that. So maybe a tahini sauce or a almond butter sauce or something, and like having like a big plate or a big bowl of that. We can eat a lot more in terms of quantity when we're eating vegetables. And so we can't necessarily go on quantity all the time of just like I eat, one bowl of food, because if that bowl is filled with um, one type of food, it's a lot more dense than another type of food. It's lighter. So vegetables we need to eat a lot more of. And so eating a plant-based diet, I just want to give you all permission to eat a lot of vegetables. And like the earth can handle that. Like eating a lot of meat is not actually sustainable for our planet. Eating a lot of vegetables is. And that's really exciting. Um, if you are eating meat, I personally do eat meat. A lot of people think I'm vegetarian, and I'm not. I was vegetarian for 6 years, and it was very detrimental to my health. But I don't eat a ton of meat either. I eat meat, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and have it in dishes with lots of vegetables, okay? And for lunch, because that's when you can digest best. So that's just what I do. Okay. I'm a Vata Pitta person, and I'm in my Pitta stage of life. I go fast and furious. If y'all don't know this about me, like my days are full and I need to be nourished well. So I do best with a little animal protein in my diet. You could add like sardines to things too, like sardines are a great support for if you need a little more to your food. Some of you might think that's really disgusting, but they're great, and you can even eat the bones in the sardines, and those are really great for calcium. And littler fish, as opposed to big fish from the ocean, are always better in terms of mercury. So we can get like caught. I mean, I could talk all day long about food and food choices, and the point is, like, we all just need to do what we can where we are with what we have, always. Because if we get too, I mean, there's like issues with every type of food, and it could make us like crazy, scary, obsessive, maniacal people, and we don't want that to happen either. We want to have peace around our our food choices and our eating. And so, yeah, there's a lot of contamination in the world, and there's a lot of nutritional knowledge out there that is dissecting food, and it's not the same as if we're just eating a, a food. We can take out like the vitamins and the proteins and the, fats and whatever out of the components out of a food, but there's a synergy that happens with eating an actual food, right? With eating a sweet potato as opposed to taking like beta carotene and, fiber and blah, 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 right? That we have it all together there. All right, get down off that soapbox, but I hope that's helpful, and you can kind of calculate with that formula what your ideal or kind of standard protein intake should be. I'll say like that little formula doesn't come from Ayurveda. From an Ayurvedic perspective, I would also point out that your protein needs would change throughout the year. They change depending on your um, your uh, interaction with the natural world. Like in the springtime, we don't actually need as much protein as we need in the fall and the winter. Okay, so that's another thing to explore. And generally doctors will just take a snapshot. They'll look at your blood work or something from one point in time, not taking into consideration the season, your life stage, yada yada, right? So this is where the magic really comes in. blood tests are great. We can gather lots of great information from them. But the magic really comes in when we can look at who we are given that one point in time snapshot that the doctor had a lab record for us. Okay. So when we're looking at the seasonal rhythm and really being in tune with what we need, our protein needs go up and down throughout the year. So less protein is needed in the springtime, more protein is needed in the fall and the winter. Okay. So let me know if anybody else has questions about protein. Oh, there's lots of comments here. I was just so, oh yeah, so Kelly asked, why do we need more protein in the fall and the winter? So that's a really great question. I didn't explain that. So in the fall and the winter, that season it's Vata season. So the elements in the environment that are predominant are air and ether. So it's a lightening up, kind of the environment is lightening up, the everything's drying out and dying basically, and that's the time of year when we need more like substantial and nourishing foods to help balance. We always want to be in balance. We are balancing out the the effects of the natural world, the seasonal cycles. So in the fall, there's lightness in the environment, and that's not a good time to be eating so much like raw greens or something that are liver clearing and really create lightness in the body. That's better in the springtime. In the fall and the winter, we do better with really dense foods. And again, depending on your constitution, and this is why it's so great to learn about this stuff for yourself, right? To really dive in. If this is fascinating to you, it's totally fascinating to me, clearly. I've spent years studying it and teaching it and continue to study and teach it. So the springtime is better for the fresh foods that are coming into our environments, the spring greens, the wild greens that are coming in, and lighter proteins, smaller beans. If you are eating animal protein, eating like chicken, fish, during the springtime, and then you look at the fall, like that's when more like hunting happens, right? If people are like David's a deer hunter, and we've been eating venison this winter. So those pieces are important to look at the timing of the year. Laura, the calculation was to multiply 0.36, so 0.36 grams of protein per pound of your ideal body weight. So so you can multiply that and find out how many grams of protein you ideally need in a day. So it's an interesting way to think about it. So I would say that would be like your maximum during the time of like the fall and the winter is that calculation, and then in the springtime needing a little less um, protein. Okay, and then let's see. These always go so fast. I clearly have a lot to say even with one question. Okay, so Joy says, how or when would you recommend eating goat cheese for Avada? How would you recommending eating cacao to Avada, who loves making yummy, healthy cacao treats? Once I start making them, I want a little something every day. Is adding a date to the end of every meal for a sweet okay, or is that like mixing fruit? Okay, great question. So a bunch of different questions. So how or when would you recommend eating goat cheese for Avada? In the summertime, so late spring, early summer, and having it with cooked vegetables or raw vegetables if you can handle raw. So this is specifically she asked about for Vada, predominant lady, which Joy is, and so goat cheese is it's kind of heavy. Dairy has a sweetness to it, even though those of us that eat more sweet foods don't really taste that in dairy. Dairy is considered sweet, and yeah, it's dense and cooling. So yeah, in the summertime with vegetables would be great. Um, I have a really awesome recipe. I wonder if I can find it. It's probably just in my head. For a beet goat cheese salad. So it's basically like a chilled salad, but so you chop up beets, boil them, cook them, and then mix them in with, I usually serve it warm actually, but you could chill it. So toasted walnuts, cilantro, cumin, salt, pepper, and goat cheese. And it's so good. So good. Fresh cilantro there. Okay, so that's a great summer salad. Beets are really nice for the liver. Okay, so how would you recommend eating cacao to Avada, who loves making yummy, healthy cacao treats? So I'm curious what you make with those, what or what your treats are that you're making. But I would suggest having cacao in like a bliss ball form, or at least combining it with a beneficial fat like coconut oil or ghee, and you can make kind of like truffles with cacao. You can use maple syrup or honey and sweeten it a little bit. I also use cacao nibs on my breakfast often. Like if I have cooked apples or pears with a little almond butter or almond milk yogurt, then I'll sprinkle some cacao nibs on top. They add a nice crunch. So that's fun. You could also use cacao to make like some healthy cookies. You could do with oats and almond flour, um, or even using like a tahini or almond butter, like a nut butter. You can make like a chocolate peanut butter, but actually with cacao and almond butter cookies. There's a great recipe in Kate O'Donnell's cookbook for a tahini cookie that you could use as a base. I actually made that with some uh, stevia sweetened chocolate chips, which was really, really tasty. Um, And then is adding a date to the end of every meal for a sweet okay? This is such a great question. And I I live this every day because I want to eat a date after every meal. But the answer is it's not ideal. It depends on what you've had for your meal. So if you've just had like a grain and vegetables, um, then sure, you can have a date afterwards. If you have had meat or beans, I wouldn't recommend it. That's not going to create much happiness in your tummy. It's going to be poor food combining to combine the date with animal protein or beans. So again, food combining really has to do with your state of agni. And so if you feel like things are going well and it's not really bothering you, then sure. You'll notice if it's an issue, if you have gas, bloating, pain in your digestive tract, or if you notice you have more ama or coating on your tongue the next day. So do a little research there, but those are just some general guidelines that I would recommend in terms of having a date at the end of each meal. Um, it might be better to have one of your uh, tahini cookies, perhaps, if you want something a little sweet. So great questions, you all. I love seeing these come in, and keep them coming. We've got one more week of oh, Joy says, yes, I make them with a bliss ball or store them in the almond butter and eat it that way. Yeah, so you might notice that that sweet craving is there. And if it starts building, so remember the principle of like increases like. Okay, so when we have more sweet, we crave more sweet. So if you're starting to kind of get on the sweet train, you might want to have a little sit down with yourself and say, like, am I eating enough balancing taste? Do I have enough bitter taste, astringent taste? Those are the ones that really balance out the sweet craving. Or am I just being drawn to sweet, 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 sweet? And, especially for somebody who's Vata predominant, if you're having healthy sweets, not refined sugar, um, a little bit every day is fine. Is It's actually helpful. Sweet taste calms Vata imbalance. So that can be helpful in terms of things like almond butter or having making bliss balls, things like that. But do think about where that food combining is is happening with whatever you just ate for your meal prior. Um, the caffeine in cacao, I would say, is negligible unless you are eating a ton of it. But if you're just mixing some in almond butter for a couple spoonfuls or putting, a couple tablespoons in a recipe of bliss balls, I would not worry about it. So, of course, we take that out when we're detoxing, but just in daily life, totally I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right. Enjoy your bliss balls. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Kelly, for being a support in the chat. And keep sending your questions in. And we'll do this one more time next week for April. And then we'll go into May and we'll switch it up a little bit. I kind of like yeah, trying different things, doing some interviews, doing some live coaching, and then also these Q&As. So stay curious, stay engaged here in this group. And if you haven't yet, sign up for the One Habit to Thrive Challenge. Our spring One Habit to Thrive Challenge is starting a week from Thursday, and I'm just doing 2 days this time. I'm going to pack, I think there's 7 sessions in total into 2 days, and we're just going to go for it. If you can't make the sessions live, they will be recorded. You can watch the replays, and they will all be up until the following Tuesday, the 11th. So no worries if you're like, but I work all day or whatever. Sign up for it. Thank you, Kelly. It's in the chat. You can sign up for that, and you'll learn a lot more about how to align with the springtime, about your constitution, about how you can set yourself up to thrive in this season and the coming summer heat. So I look forward to having you all involved there too. Sending you all lots of love. I'm off to eat lunch. Mwah. Have a beautiful day. Bye.